Money has its utility, primarily as a tool for doing things, really. You know, you can think about it as a means for obtaining luxury items, but that gets dull pretty quickly for most people that have any sense. It's like, I've been to the houses of very wealthy people, and some of them are quite remarkable, but most of because they're creative people. But most of the time, I remember going to a gated community, for example, in California, and it was a huge house. It was probably 10,000 square feet. But it was no different than a 2,000 square foot house. It was just bigger. Like, the stoves were bigger, the fridge was bigger, the wine cellar was bigger, the rooms were bigger. Who cares? It's more to take care of. It's not helpful for anything unless you're using it for a creative purpose. And, you know, they also lived in a gated community, and you can hardly imagine anything duller than that. You know, like, there's nothing there. There's no bars, there's no nightlife, there's no nightclubs, there's no corner stores, there's no churches, there's nowhere for people to hang out. There's not even any sidewalks. So who cares? And we know that the relationship between income and, I'll call it happiness. It's a pathetic measure, really, but we could say well-being or life quality.
Well, I've heard that most people are just all right with around $70,000.
Well, you're all right.
And anything more than that is just excessive.
Well, your money has done as much for you as it can do by the time you can pay your bills.
Yeah.
But think about it. This is the reason, especially in a place like North America. It's like, well, define wealth. All right, that's easy. Heat in the winter. Air conditioning in the summer, running water, right? Reliable shelter, and the provision of high quality food. Once you've got those, and then we could add to that, access to all the world's information. Okay. Everyone has that virtually, unless you've fallen right out of society. You know, those are the things that stave off. Maybe we could add reasonable access to healthcare to that. Although for most people, especially if they're young and healthy, that's irrelevant. But once you have those first 6 things, indoor plumbing, for example, you're already overwhelmingly rich by historical and even worldwide standards. You're already in the top 1/10% of all the human beings that have ever lived. And incremental movement past that just doesn't make that much difference, you know. So maybe you have a 10-year-old Hyundai Sonata. I have one of those. It's like, well, I could have a McLaren. But the incremental difference when we're stuck in a traffic jam is 0. So the radical leftists overestimate the utility of wealth in relationship to its capacity to solve the fundamental problems that beset human beings. So rich people get cancer, rich people get divorced, rich people get estranged from their children, they develop drug and alcohol problems. Like, they're sued constantly for what they're doing. They're engaged in legal battles, and their lives tend to be extraordinarily complex because it's not easy to handle money. It disappears, man, if you don't keep an eye on it, if you're not watching it and monitoring it and earning it, generally speaking, it disappears. And that most family fortunes disappear in 3 generations. And most Fortune 500 companies only last 30 years. And there is a 1%, but it churns, you know. The 1% 10 years ago, they're not the same people that are the 1% now. Some of them are, obviously, but there's quite a bit of turnover. So there's the distribution of scores. Now that's dismal. That's a dismal thing to look at. You have to understand that. Why? Look at this. 0, right? The median person has not done anything creative ever in their life with anything on any dimension. Right? It's really important to know that. And then you have these horrible people out here. Right? They do everything. They do everything. Price's law. Here's Price's law. This is something to hammer into your heart. The square root of the number of people in a domain do 50% of the work. Okay, so let's go through that. You have 10 employees. 3 of them do half the work. Makes sense. That's reasonable. You have 100 employees. 10 of them do half the work. That's a problem. So the other 90% are doing the other half. Who cares about them? You have 10,000 employees. 100 of them do half the work. Right, so here's a nasty little law. As your company grows, incompetence grows exponentially and competence grows linearly. Got it? Right? Because with 10, it's 3 who are doing half the work, but at 10,000, it's 100 that are doing half the work. So 9,900 of your employees are doing as much as the best 100. You might not even know who the best 100 are, but probably they know. And maybe their peers know too. And so one of the things that's really interesting when big companies start to shake, which means maybe they've had a bad quarter or 2 bad quarters, and the stock price starts to tip down, and the hot people who have options are not very happy about that, and maybe they start to announce layoffs, all the 100 people who have opportunities leave. And they're the ones who were doing half the work. So boy, that puts your company in a pretty rough situation, because now you've got the 9,900 people left over who were only doing half the work. And the next time you announce layoffs, the next most productive 100 leave. And so then you're left with nobody who's productive and a massive overhead payroll. Price's law, you can look that up. De Sola Price. De Sola Price is a guy who was looking at scientific productivity. And one of the things he found was, when he was looking at PhD students, is that the median number of publications for a PhD graduate when he did his work, which was in the early 60s, was 1. Okay, half as many had 2, half as many as that had 3, half as many as that had 4. It's a real step down. And one of the corollaries of that is that there's a certain number of people who are hyper-productive, and that's these people out here. And if you were graphing the distribution, let's say you graphed how many people in a population of 300 had $10,000 in a savings account. It would look very much like this. Some of them would have, most people would have like no savings whatsoever. The median person would have no savings whatsoever. And then you go up here where the 1% is, they have all the money. But the thing you want to understand about that 1% issue that you always hear about is that it applies in every single realm where there's difference in creative production. Every realm. Doesn't matter. Number of records produced, number of records sold, number of compositions written. So here's an example. 5 composers produce the music that occupies 50% of the classical repertoire, right? Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Mozart. That's right, those 5. Okay, so here's something cool. So you take all the music those people wrote. 5% of the music all those people wrote occupies 50% of the music of their writing that's played. So not only do almost all the composers never get a listen, but even among the composers who do get a listen, almost none of their music ever gets played. So then that's another example of this Price's law of scaling. So it applies to all sorts of things, like number of hockey goals scored is also distributed this way. Number of basketballs successfully put through the hoop follows the same distribution. Size of cities follows the same distribution. It's a weird law, and you can think about it in part. Why does this happen? Well, imagine what happens when you play Monopoly. What happens? Everybody has the same amount of money to begin with, right? So then you start playing. It's basically a random game. Well, some people start to win a bit, and some people start to lose a bit. And then if you win, the probability that you'll keep winning starts to increase. And if you lose, your vulnerability increases as you lose. And then maybe you've got, say, 6 people playing Monopoly. Soon one person has 0. What happens when they have 0? They're out of the game. So 0 is a weird number, because when you hit 0, you're out of the game. So then if you keep playing, people start to stack up at 0, right? What happens at the end of the game? One person has all the property and all the money, and everyone else has none. Right, that's what happens if you play an iterated trading game to its final conclusion. And that's part of the law, in a sense, that's underlying this kind of distribution. So it's not a consequence necessarily of structural inequality. It's built into the system at a deeper level than that.
If you live in a house in San Francisco and you sell it, you're a millionaire.
Yes,
You're part of the 1%.
Yes.
But obviously, you're just a former homeowner, and like, what I'm trying to say is that over time, 1% changes.
The other thing too that people don't understand very well, because they don't look into it at all, is that most of the people who are in the 1% are old. So what do you want to be? You want to be young and poor, old and rich.
Yeah.
Like what happens is, if you're lucky as you move through life, you trade your youth for security, roughly speaking. But, you're 75 and you have $5 million. Well, yeah, okay. You're 75. And of course, the amount of wealth people have accumulates as they get older. Well, if the person is fortunate and sensible, because they save up their money and they've had much more time to work. And so most of these things are multivariate problems, right? Why is there a 1%? Well, because the patriarchy is oppressive. It's like, yeah, okay, that accounts for 5% of the variance, or 10% of the variance if you want to really push your argument. But then all sorts of other things kick in. Health is a good one, and intellectual power and conscientiousness. And good luck and social network and timing is a huge part of it, and a lot of that's just random.
Yeah.
There's endless numbers of contributors to wealth disparity, not the oppression of the patriarchy. Jesus, people who think that should be embarrassed at their stupidity. And the reason I'm saying that is because you don't really start talking that way till you've been educated a little bit. But to turn everything into a univariate problem, like a one variable problem, it's the mind, it's the hallmark of a tremendously ignorant and weak mind, because things are complicated. And so are the solutions. Man, things are complicated enough, but the solutions are even worse.